Men are wearing body cams to work, in all public spaces, in all interactions with women, and society does not know how to respond or how to defend against it. Imagine a world where every casual conversation, every glance in the office, every approach on the street carries the weight of permanent documentation, not because men seek to invade privacy, but because they have learned through hard experience that their words and actions can be twisted into career ending accusations without recourse or verification. This is not speculation. This is the emerging reality as men turn to body cameras at work and smart glasses in public to record interactions, particularly with women, ensuring that truth prevails over narrative. This cautious atmosphere erodes trust and productivity, yet it arises directly from systems designed to prioritize one group's protection at the expense of balanced fairness. Men now respond by documenting everything, using devices that capture clear audio and video in high definition, legal in one party consent jurisdictions as long as the wearer participates in the conversation. Human resources departments react with alarm, issuing emails decrying the practice as disruptive to psychological safety and privacy, claiming it fosters anxiety and demonstrates distrust. Yet the irony stands clear. The very policies meant to create safety for women have bred distrust among men, who now require tangible proof to defend themselves against potential distortion. When leadership reviews the records, patterns emerge of repeated investigations targeting men exclusively, with no equivalent scrutiny applied elsewhere, prompting higher executives to intervene and demand reviews of biased processes. The result is a standoff where men insist on continuing recordings for their own security, refusing to dismantle safeguards until accountability flows both ways. Beyond the workplace, this recording trend extends into everyday social encounters, amplified by accessible technology like smart glasses that blend seamlessly into regular eyewear while housing discrete cameras capable of capturing interactions without obvious indication. Men deploy these tools when approaching women in public, whether seeking conversation or dates, preserving exact exchanges for clarity if disputes arise later. Mainstream coverage highlights cases where women discover videos of themselves online after casual street interactions, expressing shock, humiliation, and anxiety over being portrayed in unflattering contexts, sometimes while intoxicated or caught off guard. These stories portray the recordings as invasive, a new form of degradation, where personal moments become viral content for clicks or amusement. Women interviewed describe the violation of trust, realizing only after the fact that a friendly exchange was documented and shared, amassing thousands or even millions of views without consent. The technology's subtlety, no flashing lights, no held phones, makes detection nearly impossible in the moment, raising urgent questions about privacy in an era of wearable AI devices that promise convenience but enable unchecked capture. Media narratives frame women as victims of this emerging practice, with calls for legislative updates to close gaps in current laws that fail to address these novel harms. Provinces and states explore filling voids left by outdated statutes, emphasizing the need to protect against online degradation and stalking risks. Companies manufacturing the glasses maintain that users bear responsibility for legal compliance and respectful application. Yet the genie escapes the bottle as adoption grows. The panic stems from a reversal, where once accusations stood unchallenged in he said, she said scenarios, now video evidence shifts the burden, exposing inconsistencies or fabrications that previously went unexamined. This forces careful consideration of behavior on all sides, as false statements risk not only reputational damage, but potential legal repercussions when law enforcement gains access to unaltered footage. The dynamic changes fundamentally, deterring baseless claims while compelling honesty in interactions that once relied on memory and perception alone. Drawing parallels to broader movements reveals deeper patterns of response to perceived imbalances. In South Korea, decades of escalating gender tensions illustrate what happens when demands for protection evolve into mechanisms that disadvantage one group entirely. Economic pressures from financial crises intensified competition, with policies like removing veteran hiring bonuses earned through mandatory male conscription seen as victories for equality but fueling resentment. Radical online communities amplified rhetoric, from insults targeting physical traits to extreme actions that alienated wider society. Men countered not with opposition, but ruthless compliance, mirroring feminist logic back at its source. When harassment complaints arose over repeated date requests, men advocated for strict limits, such as a three-attempt rule where exceeding that threshold invited legal jeopardy, encompassing not just romantic pursuits, but casual invitations like coffee with coworkers or friends. The policy, intended to curb unwanted advances, instead chilled all male initiated interactions as the risk of criminal charges outweighed potential rewards. Women who once pushed for these safeguards found themselves frustrated when men adhered strictly, ceasing pursuits altogether to avoid peril. Dating opportunities plummeted for average women. Mentorship from male colleagues vanished under fear of misinterpretation, and even platonic hangouts carried threats of misreported violations. This created de facto segregation, where government mandated rules ostensibly protected one side but isolated both. Similar compliance emerged in other arenas. Complaints about inconsiderate public behavior, like manspreading, led men to adjust by traveling off peak or standing entirely, then reporting women for equivalent space violations with bags or items. Media portrayals of romantic or comedic banter drew accusations of harassment, prompting men to withdraw participation, rendering shows dull and unengaging, driving male audiences away while leaving female viewers with diminished options. In workplaces, calls to shatter glass ceilings met ruthless equality, eliminating special accommodations and enforcing identical standards, where physical or endurance differences led to women falling behind in hyper competitive environments. South Korea's men term this approach fighting magic with magic, agreeing outwardly while applying rules to their logical extremes, exposing unintended consequences.
The system is collapsing. Cash will be worthless soon. Crypto is your only escape. Angry's Crypto Academy is linked in the description. Go check it out now.
The outcome manifests in the world's lowest birth rate, a demographic crisis so severe that government incentives now include payments for dates and substantial sums for marriage. Yet trust erodes further as men opt for solitude over risk. This mirrors global shifts where men, after years of hearing they are unneeded or predatory, choose withdrawal, finding peace in independence rather than entanglement. Harsh economic conditions compound the issue, with women voicing struggles over basic costs on social media, seeking support that no longer arrives as men maintain distance. The core premise holds firm. When one side demands equality but practices advantage, the other enforces it ruthlessly through compliance and documentation. Recording interaction serves as the modern tool for that enforcement, providing irrefutable proof that levels the field. Women who once benefited from unverified narratives now face scrutiny, unable to claim harassment without corroboration, while men gain security against distortion. This cold era arrives not from malice, but necessity, as shattered trust leaves little room for assumptions. Women bear responsibility for pushing systems to extremes, then recoiling when those extremes rebound. The days of unchallenged demands end here, replaced by evidence based accountability that reshapes every interaction. The shift toward widespread recording represents far more than a defensive tactic. It marks a profound recalibration of social expectations, that had grown dangerously one sided over recent decades. For years, cultural narratives emphasized empowerment through unchecked validation of personal experiences, where subjective interpretation often trumped objective fact. This framework allowed claims to carry immediate weight, triggering institutional responses that prioritized speed and perceived victim support over thorough verification. Men absorbed the lesson quickly. Participation in mixed gender environments carried inherent risk when ambiguity could be resolved against them by default. The decision to document arises from accumulated cases where careers stalled, friendships dissolved, or legal entanglements emerged from interactions that seemed ordinary at the time. Consider routine workplace scenarios that once passed without issue, such as offering constructive feedback during a project review or coordinating schedules for team deliverables. When those moments later surfaced in complaints framed as discomfort or microaggression, the absence of contemporaneous evidence left men explaining intent after the fact, often to skeptical audiences already inclined toward belief in the accuser. Recording eliminates that vulnerability by preserving the exact sequence of words, tone, and context, transforming potential disputes into matters of verifiable record rather than competing recollections. This practice extends beyond mere self preservation into a broader demonstration of principle. By consistently applying the same standards of evidence once demanded primarily in one direction, men highlight the inconsistency embedded in selective accountability. If documentation strengthens truth seeking in cases involving vulnerable parties, then extending that tool universally strengthens truth seeking across the board. The resistance encountered from corporate leadership and certain advocacy groups underscores the discomfort with symmetry. Policies once celebrated for creating safer spaces now face scrutiny when the same evidentiary rigor applies reciprocally. Human resources professionals express concern that recordings chill open communication and erode collegial atmosphere. Yet, they rarely acknowledge how the prior absence of such tools already chilled male participation in certain interactions. Men who once mentored junior colleagues now hesitate to close doors for private discussions, fearing misconstruction of motives. Those who offered career guidance or networking introductions pause, calculating whether assistance could later be reframed as quid pro quo or favoritism. The cumulative effect reduces informal support networks that historically benefited everyone, particularly those entering competitive fields without established connections. Public spaces reveal an even starker evolution in behavior. Smart glasses, originally marketed for navigation, productivity, and augmented reality overlays, now serve as unobtrusive recording devices during casual encounters. A man approaching a woman at a social event, coffee shop, or park bench activates the capture function not out of suspicion, but out of accumulated caution. The footage, should any disagreement arise later, provides clarity on what was said, how it was received, and the precise nature of body language involved. This capability disrupts the traditional asymmetry where post interaction narratives could form without contradiction. When videos surface online, whether through deliberate sharing or leaks, reactions split sharply. Some view the practice as empowering for men who have long felt defenseless against misrepresentation. Others decry it as voyeuristic or punitive, arguing that capturing unscripted moments violates an implicit social contract of mutual privacy. The debate intensifies because the technology itself remains neutral. Its impact depends entirely on application and cultural context. Legislative responses attempt to address the perceived imbalance by proposing restrictions tailored to gender specific recording scenarios. Proposals circulate in various jurisdictions to classify non consensual recording of women by men as enhanced offenses, potentially carrying heavier penalties than general privacy violations. Advocates argue that the practice disproportionately targets women, exposing them to harassment through distribution or doxing risks. Yet these efforts confront significant legal hurdles. In one party consent regions, which cover a substantial portion of North America and other areas, the recorder's participation in the conversation satisfies statutory requirements for legality. Expanding prohibitions would require overriding established privacy frameworks, a move courts often resist absent compelling evidence of widespread harm outweighing free expression and self defense interests. Moreover, any law singling out male to female recordings risks constitutional challenges on equal protection grounds, as it would create gender based distinctions in what constitutes permissible evidence collection. The deeper consequence lies in behavioral adaptation across entire populations. When recording becomes commonplace, interactions inherently carry greater weight. People speak more deliberately, aware that words may resurface in unaltered form. Flirtation, humor, and casual banter shift toward caution, as offhand remarks once forgotten now carry permanent digital footprints. This heightened mindfulness discourages spontaneity but promotes precision and respect, qualities often absent in environments where consequences fell unevenly. Women, confronting the reality that exaggeration or selective memory no longer enjoys automatic deference, adjust their own communication accordingly. The result resembles a mutual deterrence pact. Both sides recognize that distortion invites swift rebuttal through irrefutable proof. False accusations, once a low risk strategy in ambiguous cases, become high risk endeavors when contradicted by time stamped video showing different sequences or absent elements. South Korea's experience provides the clearest historical precedent for how compliance can accelerate societal fracturing when applied without compromise. The country's gender dynamics deteriorated through cycles of escalation that began with legitimate grievances, but expanded into sweeping condemnations of male existence itself. Economic stagnation following earlier crises left young people competing fiercely for limited opportunities, amplifying resentment over perceived structural advantages. Mandatory military service for men created tangible disparities in career entry points, which policies gradually dismantled under equality banners. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Online spaces radicalize discourse, with communities trading increasingly extreme rhetoric that dehumanized the opposite gender. Rather than retreat or negotiate, large numbers of men adopted a strategy of literal adherence to the rules feminists had championed. When activists demanded stringent protections against unwanted advances, men supported codifying those protections into law with precise thresholds. The three rejection limit emerged not as satire, but as earnest policy advocacy. Any male request, romantic or otherwise, exceeding three refusals from the same woman would trigger misdemeanor level consequences. Implementation revealed the policy's double edged nature. Men facing potential criminal liability for persistent friendliness or professional collaboration withdrew entirely from initiation. Women who valued male attention, whether for dating, friendship, or workplace guidance, discovered the chilling effect firsthand. Invitations ceased, Mentorship opportunities dried up, and casual group activities involving mixed genders became fraught with risk assessment. The same dynamic repeated in public transit debates. Complaints about men occupying excessive space prompted strict enforcement of single seat policies. Men complied by arriving earlier, standing for entire commutes, or selecting women only cars where available, then documenting violations by women who placed bags, coats, or purchases on adjacent seats. Reports flowed in both directions, turning everyday rides into enforcement zones rather than shared spaces. Entertainment followed suit. Dramas and variety shows, once filled with playful banter and romantic tension, faced accusations of normalizing harassment. Producers, responding to pressure, sanitized content, removing jokes, flirtatious dialogue, and physical comedy that could be construed as objectifying. Male viewership collapsed as the resulting programs grew predictable and sterile. Women, left with diminished creative output, expressed frustration over the loss of engaging narratives, yet the changes stemmed directly from earlier demands for content reform. Workplace equality initiatives met similar rigorous application. Affirmative measures, once reserved for women, disappeared under calls for identical treatment. Performance metrics standardized without adjustment for physical differences or life circumstances, leading to higher attrition among women in demanding roles. Promotions went strictly by results, and accommodations vanished. The phrase fighting magic with magic captured the essence. Men mirrored the logic of unilateral advantage back at its originators, exposing how quickly protections could become handicaps when applied evenly. Demographic collapse followed inevitably. Birth rates plunged to fractions of replacement level, prompting emergency government programs offering direct financial incentives for dating, cohabitation, and marriage. Payments reached thousands for tying the knot, yet participation remained low because foundational trust had eroded beyond repair. Young men, observing older generations entangled in divorce proceedings, alimony obligations, and custody battles weighted against them, opted for independence. The pattern globalizes as similar incentives appear in other nations facing fertility crises, yet the underlying cause remains unaddressed. When one gender perceives systemic bias favoring the other, withdrawal becomes rational self preservation. Contemporary economic pressures accelerate the divergence. Rising living costs strain single income households, particularly in urban centers where housing, transportation, and essentials consume ever larger portions of earnings. Women facing these realities increasingly voice frustration online, lamenting the absence of partnership support once assumed available. Posts detailing struggles with rent, groceries, and debt accumulate likes and shares within certain circles, often accompanied by pleas for men to step forward as providers. The responses range from silence to pointed reminders that traditional roles dissolved under deliberate cultural pressure. Men who once embraced responsibility now prioritize personal stability, building savings, skills, and networks without entanglements that carry disproportionate downside risk. The result manifests as parallel realities. One group navigating independence successfully through discipline and focus, the other confronting the limits of going it alone in an unforgiving economy. This cold era solidifies through institutional reinforcement. Courts increasingly demand corroboration in civil and criminal matters involving interpersonal disputes, reducing reliance on testimony alone. Employers implement stricter evidence protocols to avoid liability traps, inadvertently validating the recording trend by treating documented interactions as gold standard proof. Social platforms grapple with content moderation challenges as videos circulate, balancing free speech against privacy concerns, while algorithms amplify emotionally charged clips. The cumulative momentum proves difficult to reverse because the underlying grievance driving adoption remains unresolved. Until accountability applies symmetrically, protective measures will proliferate in response. Men entering adulthood today inherit this landscape fully formed. They observe predecessors navigating minefields of accusation and presumption, then choose paths minimizing exposure. Hobbies, fitness, career advancement, and male only social circles fill the space once occupied by mixed gender pursuits. Dating apps see declining male engagement as users recognize the effort to outcome ratio skews negatively when evidence collection becomes standard practice. Organic encounters diminish as public caution rises. The overall effect isolates genders further, reducing casual cross pollination that historically fostered relationships and mutual understanding. Women confronting these changes experience disorientation. Expectations cultivated over generations that attention flows readily, support arrives naturally, and claims receive deference clash with emerging realities where evidence dictates outcomes. Social media amplifies the dissonance, with viral threads expressing bewilderment over male disinterest or outright avoidance. Some advocate louder for restrictions on recording technology, framing it as essential protection. Others acknowledge the shift and adapt, emphasizing personal accountability and direct communication to rebuild credibility. The divide deepens between those demanding restoration of prior advantages and those accepting that reciprocity now governs interactions. The irreversible aspect stems from technological diffusion. Affordable body cameras, smart glasses, and smartphone applications democratize recording to the point where opting out becomes the exception. Once millions carry these tools habitually, the baseline expectation moves toward documentation rather than trust. Attempts to outlaw or heavily regulate the practice encounter resistance from civil liberties advocates who recognize self defense value, particularly for historically vulnerable groups, now extending safeguards outward. The genie, having left the bottle, reshapes norms permanently. Economic incentives reinforce the trend. Men channeling energy into self improvement rather than relational investment often achieve greater financial security. Compound interest on savings, uninterrupted by divorce settlements or child support obligations, accelerates wealth accumulation. Women facing solo financial burdens discover the steep cost of independence when traditional support structures vanish. The disparity widens, creating visible demonstrations of divergent life outcomes that further discourage cross gender reliance. Cultural production reflects the fracture. Media narratives increasingly portray male withdrawal as pathological rather than adaptive. Yet audiences fragment along gender lines, with men gravitating toward content validating their experiences and women seeking affirmation of victimhood or empowerment. The polarization entrenches positions, making dialogue rarer and compromise harder. Ultimately, the recording phenomenon serves as both symptom and catalyst of deeper realignment. It exposes fractures long papered over by asymmetric norms, then accelerates healing through enforced transparency. Society transitions from assumption based trust to evidence based interaction, a change painful in transition, but stabilizing in outcome. Those who master the new rules thrive. Those clinging to old privileges struggle. The era of unchecked narrative yields to one of verifiable truth, and with it comes a colder but clearer landscape for all involved. The transformation accelerates when institutions themselves begin to internalize the new evidentiary standard. Corporate training sessions that once focused exclusively on recognizing subtle forms of misconduct now include modules on the proper handling of recorded evidence, how to verify timestamps, and the risks of proceeding with investigations absent corroborating footage. Managers receive guidance on navigating situations where an employee presents a body cam clip contradicting a verbal complaint, forcing decisions based on pixel level reality rather than emotional framing. This shift compels a reevaluation of long standing protocols that favored rapid response over deliberate inquiry. What used to resolve in days through private conversations now extends into weeks or months of review, cross referencing multiple angles if available, and consulting legal teams to avoid exposure to defamation countersuits or wrongful termination claims. The added administrative burden frustrates those accustomed to swift resolutions, yet it also reduces the incidence of overturned findings later challenged in arbitration or court. Companies quietly adjust internal policies to discourage unsubstantiated reports while quietly tolerating recording as a practical shield against external litigation. The paradox emerges clearly. The very mechanisms created to shield certain employees from harm now require safeguards against their potential misuse, turning HR departments into reluctant arbiters of digital truth. Outside corporate walls, the public sphere undergoes parallel changes in tone and texture. Social venues that once buzzed with effortless mingling now carry an undercurrent of calculation. Nightclubs install signage, reminding patrons that recording may occur not as prohibition, but as fair warning. Bartenders notice shifts in patron behavior. Groups cluster by gender more often, conversations stay surface level longer, and approaches happen less frequently unless preceded by visible mutual interest. Men who once relied on charisma and quick wit now weigh whether initiating dialogue merits the documentation risk, opting instead for environments where interactions remain same gender or professionally structured. Women report feeling watched in ways that feel foreign, realizing that a sharp retort or dismissive gesture might later appear in edited clips stripped of preceding context. The knowledge that any exchange could become permanent record encourages restraint on all sides, replacing impulsive reactions with measured responses. Over time, this enforced mindfulness reshapes social scripts entirely, favoring clarity over flair, directness over innuendo, and mutual agreement over assumption. Dating landscapes fracture most visibly under the weight of this new reality. Applications see usage patterns diverge sharply. Men reduce swipes and messages, concentrating effort on profiles displaying clear compatibility signals while avoiding those with histories of public disputes or inflammatory posts. Women who once received abundant attention find matches slowing as algorithms reflect declining engagement from the male side. Organic meetings in everyday settings decline further because the default assumption now includes potential recording. A smile across a bookstore aisle, a compliment on a train platform, or a request for directions all carry latent risk if misinterpreted later. The cumulative effect shrinks the pool of spontaneous encounters, pushing remaining interactions toward premeditated channels where expectations receive explicit statement up front. Consent discussions that once felt awkward now become standard opening moves, framed not as formality, but as mutual protection. Phrases like, just so we're clear, I'm recording for my own records, enter common parlance in certain circles, normalizing what was once unthinkable. Economic dimensions compound the social withdrawal. Single men channeling resources exclusively into personal development accumulate assets at rates that compound dramatically over years. Retirement accounts grow undisturbed by shared expenses or legal obligations following breakups. Real estate purchases happen solo, often in locations chosen for lifestyle rather than family proximity. Career trajectories steepen when energy once diverted to courtship redirects toward skill building, certifications, and side ventures. The financial independence achieved through this focus creates visible markers of success. Luxury vehicles parked in modest garages, international travel without compromise, high end fitness memberships, and collections of hobbies pursued deeply rather than superficially. Women observing these patterns from the outside express a mixture of admiration and frustration, recognizing the advantages of undivided attention to self, yet confronting the reality that such focus no longer includes provision for others by default. Social media feeds fill with contrasting images: men showcasing quiet competence and freedom, women documenting struggles with inflation adjusted wages, student loan burdens, and housing markets that punish single earners. Policy arenas reflect the growing divide. Legislative proposals aimed at curbing recording technology face mounting opposition from groups arguing that self documentation serves as a legitimate counterbalance to asymmetric power structures in other domains. Civil liberties organizations filed briefs highlighting the danger of carving out gender specific exceptions to privacy laws, warning that such carve outs set dangerous precedents for selective enforcement. Courts in one party consent jurisdictions consistently uphold the legality of surreptitious recording when one participant consents, citing long standing precedent that balances individual protection against collective privacy interests. Attempts to introduce two-party mandates for interpersonal encounters encounter resistance because they would effectively criminalize routine self-protection in environments already deemed high risk. The stalemate leaves the status quo intact, allowing adoption to spread organically as prices for wearable cameras continue to drop and battery life extends to all-day capture. International comparisons sharpen the picture. Nations with strict two party consent traditions see slower uptake of body worn recording in civilian contexts. Yet, even there, men explore legal workarounds such as openly announced recording via visible devices or written notices carried on person. In jurisdictions with weaker rule of law traditions, the practice spreads faster because institutional protections prove unreliable, making personal evidence the only reliable defense. Global online communities exchange strategies, sharing firmware modifications for extended recording, optimal camera angles for natural capture, and legal templates for responding to cease and desist demands. The cross pollination accelerates innovation, turning what began as niche self defense into a mainstream behavioral norm across cultural boundaries. Psychological impacts surface gradually but persistently. Men report lower baseline anxiety in mixed settings when carrying recording capability, describing a sense of restored agency after years of navigating uncertainty. Sleep improves for some as nagging worries about past interactions lose their grip in the presence of tangible safeguards. Confidence returns in professional environments where mentorship and collaboration resume under documented conditions, free from lingering fear of retroactive reinterpretation. Women experience the inverse in many cases: heightened self consciousness during routine exchanges, second guessing tone and phrasing, and occasional resentment toward technology that strips away plausible deniability. Mental health discussions within female online spaces increasingly address the stress of living under constant potential scrutiny, with some advocating digital detoxes from environments where recording proliferates, while others push for collective adaptation through stricter self discipline and accountability. Family structures evolve under the same pressures. Younger generations witness parental and older sibling relationships dissolve or never form due to perceived risks, internalizing caution as a core value. Marriage rates continue downward trends already underway, replaced by cohabitation agreements drafted with lawyer oversight or conscious singlehood framed as deliberate choice rather than default outcome. Children raised in these households grow up observing pragmatic rather than romantic models of gender interaction, absorbing lessons about evidence, reciprocity, and personal sovereignty early. The long term demographic implications compound existing fertility challenges, prompting renewed government interest in incentives that address root causes rather than surface symptoms. Proposals shift from direct payments toward structural reforms, equalizing parental leave without gender presumption, standardizing child support calculations based on actual income contribution, and reforming family courts to prioritize verifiable contribution over traditional provider roles. Cultural production mirrors the realignment. Independent creators produce content celebrating male solitude and achievement without apology, gaining large followings among audiences seeking validation outside mainstream narratives. Streaming platforms see surges in programming focused on self reliance, skill acquisition, and non relational fulfillment, while traditional romantic comedies struggle to retain viewership. Female led content increasingly explores themes of navigating independence amid shifting expectations, with some acknowledging the advantages of mutual documentation in rebuilding trust. The creative output splits audiences more cleanly along ideological lines, reducing shared cultural touchstones and reinforcing echo chambers. Technological convergence pushes boundaries further. Artificial intelligence integration into wearable devices enables real time transcription, sentiment analysis, and flagging of potentially escalatory language, giving users instant feedback on conversational dynamics. Future iterations promise automated redaction of sensitive portions before sharing, selective memory modes that retain only disputed segments, and blockchain verified timestamps that prevent tampering claims. These advancements make documentation less intrusive while increasing reliability, further entrenching the practice as standard rather than exceptional. The overarching trajectory points toward a society organized around verifiable interaction rather than assumed goodwill. Trust rebuilds slowly, not through declarations, but through consistent demonstration that consequences attach equally regardless of gender. The recording wave serves as both bridge and barrier in that process. It exposes fractures, enforces symmetry, and compels adaptation from all parties. Those who embrace transparency gain security and credibility. Those who resist find themselves increasingly marginalized in environments that demand proof over narrative. The institutional adaptation continues to deepen as educational environments begin mirroring workplace changes. Universities and colleges, long battlegrounds for competing narratives around consent, harassment, and equity, now grapple with student led initiatives to record lectures, office hour discussions, and group project meetings. Male students, particularly those in fields with high female representation, such as education, nursing, and certain social sciences, cite the same protective logic that drives corporate body cam usage: the need for objective evidence when accusations can emerge months or years after an event. Campus policies struggle to keep pace. Some institutions issue blanket prohibitions on recording in academic settings, citing disruption to intellectual freedom and the confidential nature of certain conversations. Yet enforcement proves inconsistent when students invoke state recording laws or federal protections for self defense in environments already saturated with surveillance from institutional cameras. Title IX offices once focused almost exclusively on processing complaints through an investigative model weighted toward complainant credibility, now face mounting caseloads involving counter submissions of private recordings that directly challenge official accounts. Hearing panels accustomed to weighing he said, she said testimony discover that video clips force reconsideration of timelines, exact phrasing, and visible demeanor, frequently leading to findings of insufficient evidence when footage reveals context previously omitted or reframed. This evidentiary pivot alters campus culture in measurable ways. Male students report greater willingness to participate in mixed gender study groups, tutor female classmates, or accept leadership roles in collaborative projects when they maintain personal documentation as backup. The chilling effect that once suppressed male engagement in certain academic spaces begins to thaw under the assurance that truth can be preserved in high definition. Female students, meanwhile, adjust by becoming more precise in their language during disputes, aware that exaggeration or selective emphasis risks swift contradiction. Informal mentorship networks revive cautiously. Professors and teaching assistants resume one on one advising sessions with doors open or recordings mutually agreed upon, restoring opportunities that had eroded under fear of misinterpretation. The overall atmosphere shifts from suspicion toward carded functionality, where documentation serves as the unspoken foundation, allowing interaction to resume without constant second guessing. Professional associations and licensing bodies take note of the trend and begin updating ethical guidelines to reflect the reality of pervasive recording. Codes of conduct that previously emphasized avoiding even the appearance of impropriety now include clauses addressing the responsible use of personal recording devices, stressing transparency when footage might enter formal proceedings. Continuing education courses incorporate modules on digital evidence management, teaching practitioners how to authenticate recordings, chain of custody protocols, and the ethical boundaries of sharing private clips. In fields such as healthcare, law enforcement support roles, and customer facing service positions, where interactions frequently involve power imbalances, training now routinely covers scenarios in which a provider or employee might activate a body camera to document patient, client, or colleague encounters that later become contested. The result is a profession wide normalization of personal documentation as a legitimate risk management tool rather than an adversarial act. Beyond formal institutions, community and recreational spaces reveal subtler but equally telling adaptations. Gyms, martial arts dojos, co ed sports leagues, and hobbyist meetups that once fostered easy camaraderie now feature visible reminders about personal recording policies. Organizers post notices clarifying that participants may document interactions for personal safety, while simultaneously urging discretion to preserve the welcoming atmosphere. In mixed gender fitness classes, men position themselves strategically to avoid accidental proximity complaints, often choosing corners or back rows where interactions remain minimal. Women notice the shift and sometimes express discomfort with the perceived coldness. Yet many quietly adopt similar caution by keeping phones ready or bringing friends to sessions. Pickup basketball games on public courts see fewer mixed gender lineups as players default to same gender squads to sidestep any risk of misinterpreted physical contact or verbal exchanges. The spontaneous, boundary testing nature of recreational socializing contracts replaced by more structured, prearranged gatherings where expectations receive clear articulation beforehand. Transportation hubs and daily commutes display another layer of behavioral recalibration. Public transit riders increasingly choose seats or cars that minimize mixed gender adjacency during peak hours, not out of overt hostility, but from a shared understanding that proximity can spark disputes, later reframed through selective memory. Men stand rather than sit beside unfamiliar women when space allows, then document any encroachment on their own space with discrete footage. Women who once placed bags on adjacent seats now keep belongings closer after witnessing reports circulate online about equivalent violations. Ride sharing drivers install visible dashboard cameras marketed explicitly for passenger driver interactions, advertising the feature as protection for both parties. Passengers notice the hardware and adjust behavior accordingly, reducing complaints that previously relied on uncorroborated accounts. The net outcome transforms routine mobility from a zone of assumed civility into one of quiet mutual vigilance. Online spaces, where much of the initial discourse around recording originated, evolve into primary battlegrounds for shaping public perception. Forums dedicated to men's issues compile databases of anonymized clips demonstrating successful defenses against false claims, offering templates for how to present footage in workplace investigations or legal proceedings without violating platform rules. Counter communities focused on women's safety aggregate examples of recordings used punitively or shared maliciously, building cases for stricter regulation while highlighting emotional tolls. The exchange of evidence and counter evidence creates a feedback loop. Each viral clip showing exoneration through video emboldens more men to adopt the practice, while each clip showing humiliation or revenge posting galvanizes calls for prohibition. Social media algorithms amplify the most emotionally charged content, ensuring that moderate voices drown in outrage cycles. Influencers on both sides gain followings by framing the issue in absolutist terms, either as essential self defense or as creeping surveillance, leaving little room for nuanced discussion of balanced application. Legal scholarship begins producing in depth analyses of the long term implications. Law review articles explore whether pervasive civilian recording constitutes a de facto surveillance state imposed bottom up rather than top down, questioning whether society can sustain meaningful privacy when everyone carries potential broadcast equipment. Others examine equal protection arguments against gender specific recording bans, predicting that courts will strike down such measures as discriminatory unless identical restrictions apply regardless of direction. Privacy tort scholars debate whether the reasonable expectation of privacy standard still holds in public or semi public spaces when wearable technology becomes ubiquitous. Emerging case law gradually clarifies boundaries. Appellate decisions uphold one party consent in workplace disputes, reject invasion of privacy claims when recordings capture consensual conversations, and impose liability only when footage disseminates with intent to harass rather than defend. International observers note the phenomenon spreading beyond North America and East Asia. European countries with stricter data protection frameworks witness slower adoption. Yet expats and travelers report carrying discrete devices when visiting jurisdictions perceived as higher risk. In Latin American and African urban centers, where institutional trust remains low, men in service industries adopt body cams faster than in wealthier nations, citing protection against both false customer complaints and extortion attempts. The global diffusion occurs unevenly, shaped by local legal traditions, economic pressures, and cultural attitudes toward authority and individual agency. Family court proceedings feel the impact most acutely. Divorce and custody battles increasingly feature submissions of recorded exchanges between ex partners, from co parenting communications to pick up drop off interactions. Judges accustomed to weighing credibility through demeanor and testimony now confront time-stamped video that resolves factual disputes quickly. Alimony and child support determinations begin incorporating evidence of financial independence demonstrated through years of solo asset accumulation, reducing assumptions about traditional provider roles. Parenting plans emphasize verifiable compliance with visitation schedules, with recordings serving as neutral referees when cooperation breaks down. The shift discourages weaponization of allegations as leverage, compelling parties to maintain documented civility even amid conflict. Young men entering the workforce inherit this framework as baseline reality. Career advice content aimed at them stresses recording as standard professional hygiene, akin to maintaining a clean resume or building an emergency fund. Mentorship programs designed for male participants teach best practices for device usage, file organization, and legal consultation before sharing footage. The generation coming of age now views mixed gender interaction through a lens of calculated risk management rather than open possibility, channeling energy into pursuits that offer high reward with low exposure. Entrepreneurship, remote work, specialized trades, and digital nomadism that minimize reliance on corporate hierarchies prone to internal politics. Women navigating the same landscape face a steeper learning curve. Those who thrive tend to adopt parallel strategies, meticulous documentation of their own interactions, explicit boundary setting up front, and cultivation of all female professional networks that bypass mixed gender friction points. High achieving women in competitive fields emphasize results over relational capital, recognizing that informal alliances carry new liabilities when evidence can contradict narrative. Social media influencers who once built audiences around dating struggles pivot toward content celebrating self sufficiency, financial literacy, and strategic solitude, mirroring the messaging that resonates with men but tailored to female experiences. The cumulative weight of these changes solidifies a new social contract grounded in reciprocity through transparency. Trust no longer flows from assumed benevolence, but from consistent proof that behavior aligns with stated intentions. The recording trend, initially a defensive reaction, evolves into the infrastructure supporting that contract. As adoption reaches critical mass, opting out becomes the outlier position, akin to refusing seatbelts in an era when they became mandatory. Society reorganizes around the expectation that words and actions carry permanent weight, discouraging deception while rewarding precision and mutual respect. This realignment proves painful for those invested in prior asymmetries, yet liberating for those who gain protection from distortion. The era of narrative dominance fades, replaced by one where evidence reigns supreme. The transition remains incomplete, with resistance pockets persisting and new tensions emerging, but the direction appears locked in. Colder interactions, clearer accountability, and a foundation rebuilt on verifiable fact rather than selective belief. The momentum behind this transformation reaches into the realm of everyday commerce and service industries, where face to face transactions once relied entirely on mutual courtesy and verbal agreement. Retail workers, delivery personnel, restaurant staff, and rideshare drivers now routinely equip themselves with body worn cameras or chest mounted recorders as standard gear. In customer service roles that involve high emotional intensity or frequent disputes over refunds, returns, or perceived rudeness, the presence of footage changes dynamics immediately. A shopper demanding an unauthorized discount or becoming verbally aggressive finds their behavior captured in real time, shifting leverage from accusation to verifiable record. Employees who previously faced write ups or terminations based on customer complaints alone now present clips showing context, such as a patron initiating hostility, refusing to follow store policy, or fabricating events that frequently lead to dropped investigations or reverse disciplinary actions. Management teams, once quick to side with paying customers to preserve satisfaction metrics, grow more cautious when confronted with clear evidence contradicting verbal accounts. The practice spreads through word of mouth in employee break rooms and online worker forums, where shared footage demonstrates successful outcomes and encourages broader adoption, even in companies that do not officially provide the devices. Service providers in more intimate or vulnerable settings adopt similar safeguards with heightened urgency. Home repair technicians, plumbers, electricians, and personal trainers working one on one with clients install visible or discrete cameras in work vans or on tool belts, citing the dual protection against theft accusations, boundary violations, or exaggerated injury claims. A contractor accused of damaging property beyond the scope of work can produce footage showing the pre existing condition or the exact steps taken during the job. Personal trainers document sessions to refute later complaints about inappropriate touching when all physical contact occurred within agreed exercise protocols. Clients notice the equipment and often sign waivers acknowledging recording as a condition of service, normalizing the practice as mutual assurance rather than mistrust. The result emerges as a quieter, more professional tone in these interactions. Fewer dramatic escalations, clearer communication of expectations up front, and a general decline in frivolous disputes that once drained time and resources from actual work. Healthcare delivery feels the ripple effects in outpatient and home care settings. Nurses, physical therapists, and home health aides carrying portable recorders during patient visits gain a layer of protection against allegations of neglect, abuse, or improper handling when patients or family members later dispute care quality. Footage showing medication administration times, vital sign checks, mobility assistance techniques, and respectful dialogue frequently resolves complaints before they escalate to formal reviews or litigation. Patients with cognitive impairments or family members prone to misunderstanding instructions sometimes react with initial discomfort upon noticing devices. Yet many come to appreciate the clarity when disputes arise over what was said or done during a visit. Regulatory bodies overseeing healthcare licensing begin incorporating guidance on ethical recording use, balancing patient privacy with practitioner safety in environments where power imbalances and high stakes outcomes intersect daily. Public safety professions observe the civilian trend and accelerate their own already established body camera programs, though with renewed emphasis on transparency toward the public rather than solely internal accountability. Police departments facing persistent scrutiny over use of force incidents expand footage release policies to include quicker public access in non sensitive cases, aiming to preempt narrative dominance by releasing verified clips early. The parallel civilian adoption of recording creates an unexpected symmetry. When officers interact with citizens who may themselves be wearing discrete cameras, both sides operate under the knowledge that multiple angles exist. This mutual visibility discourages exaggeration from either direction, encouraging de escalation tactics and precise radio communication that can later corroborate events. Community relations meetings shift tone as residents arrive equipped with their own footage of prior encounters, turning discussions from accusation heavy to evidence based exchanges that focus on specific behaviors rather than broad systemic claims. The entertainment and hospitality sectors adapt in creative and sometimes strained ways. Nightlife venues, bars, clubs, lounges install prominent signage about potential patron recording while training bouncers and staff on protocols for handling disputes captured on personal devices. Managers review submitted clips when altercations occur, often identifying instigators more accurately than eyewitness recollections alone allow. Performers in stand up comedy, improv troupes, and audience interactive shows notice audience members activating glasses or body cams during sets, leading some comedians to preface routines with lighthearted disclaimers about material being recorded and potentially shared. The awareness influences content creation. Edgier jokes give way to more observational humor that avoids personal targeting, while performers document their own sets for protection against out of context viral clips that misrepresent intent. Event organizers for conferences, trade shows, and networking mixers distribute guidelines encouraging attendees to announce recording intentions when approaching speakers or exhibitors, fostering an atmosphere of informed consent that reduces post event drama. Corporate real estate and shared office environments reflect the broader caution in physical layout and policy. Open plan offices that once promoted serendipitous collaboration now see more partition zones, booked meeting rooms for even brief discussions, and visible camera indicators on personal devices during hybrid in person sessions. Facilities teams receive requests for additional power outlets to support all day recording batteries and lockers for secure device storage during non work hours. Lease agreements for co working spaces begin including clauses acknowledging that tenants may record in common areas for personal safety, shifting liability frameworks away from blanket privacy expectations toward shared responsibility for behavior. The physical redesign subtly reinforces the new behavioral baseline. Interaction happens deliberately rather than casually, with documentation serving as the invisible third party in every exchange. Financial services and high trust professions integrate recording into client facing routines with particular care. Wealth advisors, real estate agents, insurance brokers, and financial planners activate body cams or desk mounted recorders during consultations involving large asset transfers, investment recommendations, or policy explanations. The practice protects against later claims of unsuitable advice, undisclosed conflicts, or pressure tactics when clients experience market downturns or regret decisions. Clients sign digital acknowledgments of recording at the start of relationships, and many express relief at having their own verbal confirmations preserved alongside advisor notes. Regulatory compliance departments review sample footage during audits, appreciating the granular detail that paper trails or call logs cannot match. The added layer of verification strengthens professional credibility while reducing the volume of baseless complaints that once tied up resources. Volunteer and nonprofit sectors encounter the trend with mixed reactions. Community organizers, charity event coordinators, and crisis intervention workers adopt discreet recording when dealing with emotionally charged situations involving vulnerable populations. Footage helps document consent for participation, accurate recounting of services provided, and protection against accusations of favoritism or misconduct in resource allocation. Donors and board members sometimes request access to recordings for transparency in high profile India initiatives, creating tension between privacy concerns and the accountability demands. The practice spreads unevenly, with larger organizations formalizing protocols while smaller grassroots groups rely on informal adoption driven by participant caution. Sports and fitness coaching at amateur and semi professional levels incorporate recording as routine practice. Personal trainers film sessions for form correction and progress tracking, simultaneously creating objective records of client interactions. Martial arts instructors document sparring and technique demonstrations to refute claims of excessive force or unsafe training environments. Youth sports coaches equip themselves with cameras during practices and games involving mixed gender teams or parent spectators, providing clear evidence when disputes arise over playing time, coaching decisions, or sideline conduct. The availability of footage reduces reliance on conflicting parent recollections and fosters more constructive post game discussions focused on verifiable events. Travel and tourism industries adjust to the reality of globally mobile recorders. Tour guides in international destinations carry body cams to document group dynamics, safety briefings, and itinerary adherence, protecting against complaints about missed stops, unsafe conditions, or discriminatory treatment. Hotel staff activate recording during guest check ins, maintenance calls, or incident responses to capture exact exchanges and conditions reported. Travelers themselves increasingly use smart glasses or chest mounts to preserve evidence in cross cultural encounters where language barriers or differing norms increase misunderstanding risk. The shared knowledge that both parties may be documenting encourages clearer communication and quicker resolution of minor conflicts. The architectural and urban planning implications emerge slowly but steadily. Public space designers incorporate more seating clusters arranged for natural separation by gender or group size, anticipating reduced spontaneous mingling. Transit authorities experiment with designated quiet cars or single gender options during peak times in response to persistent complaints and counter complaints. Building codes in new commercial developments begin requiring power infrastructure supportive of personal electronics, recognizing that all day recording has become a de facto expectation for many occupants. The physical environment starts subtly encoding the new social contract, spaces built for deliberate interaction rather than assumed ease. Media training for public figures and influencers evolves to account for constant potential capture. Politicians, celebrities, and online personalities rehearse responses with the understanding that offhand remarks may surface unaltered. Press handlers advise clients to assume every microphone or pair of glasses carries recording capability, shifting rhetoric toward precision and away from colorful exaggeration. The discipline spills into corporate spokespeople and brand ambassadors who now factor footage risk into crisis communication planning. The philosophical undercurrent driving this entire shift deserves examination. After decades of cultural emphasis on lived experience as primary truth, the pendulum swings toward empirical verification as the final arbiter. Subjective interpretation retains value in artistic, emotional, and personal realms, but loses monopoly status in factual disputes involving consequences. The recording wave enforces a materialist epistemology in daily life. What can be seen and heard on unaltered video trumps what is remembered or asserted. This return to tangible proof challenges postmodern skepticism about objective reality, reasserting that certain truths exist independently of perspective when captured mechanically. The long arc suggests stabilization rather than endless escalation. Once recording saturates enough interactions, the novelty fades and behaviors normalize around the new baseline. People speak with greater forethought, act with clearer intent, and resolve differences through reference to shared records rather than competing stories. The colder tone that initially alarms gives way to a more functional civility grounded in mutual deterrence. Trust rebuilds not naively, but through demonstrated consistency over time. Society emerges well leaner in its relational expectations, yet more robust in its mechanisms for fairness. The experiment in radical transparency, born of defensive necessity, proves durable because it addresses core grievances on both sides without requiring one to dominate the other. The recording era becomes simply the era of evidence, where words matter because they can be revisited exactly as spoken. The expansion of recording practices into the fabric of ordinary life creates ripple effects that reshape even the most mundane routines. Morning commutes, grocery runs, neighborhood walks, and casual errands now carry an implicit layer of documentation for many men who have integrated the habit fully. A quick stop at a convenience store to grab coffee might include a chest mounted camera running in the background, not because conflict is expected, but because small misunderstandings, overchange given, perceived rudeness from a cashier, or an accidental bump in a crowded aisle have in the past escalated into complaints relayed through social networks or employer tip lines. The footage sits quietly on a secure drive until needed, serving as insurance against rare but high impact distortions. Over months and years, the mere knowledge that such records exist influences behavior on both sides of every counter. Clerks become noticeably more polite and precise when they spot the small indicator light or the outline of a device. Customers temper demands that once relied on volume and persistence to win concessions. The atmosphere in these everyday venues shifts toward brisk efficiency laced with caution, where transactions conclude faster and with fewer escalations because the potential for permanent documentation discourages theater. This normalization extends into family oriented public spaces. Parks, playgrounds, community pools, and youth sports fields see fathers and male guardians adopting recording more frequently during drop offs, pickups, and sideline interactions. A dad coaching his daughter's soccer team or helping organize a school fundraiser now carries a device that captures exchanges with other parents, coaches, or volunteers. When a disagreement arises over playing time, referee calls, or resource allocation, the first instinct shifts from heated argument to calm reference to what actually occurred on tape. Parent group chats that once filled with rapid fire accusations slow down as participants realize screenshots or quoted messages can be countered with video context. The change reduces gossip fueled feuds that previously poisoned volunteer efforts and youth programs. Organizers appreciate the de escalation, even if they privately express unease about the surveillance feel it introduces. Children growing up in these environments absorb the lesson early. Words and actions in shared spaces carry weight beyond the moment, a principle that carries forward into their own adult interactions. Neighborhood dynamics evolve under the same pressure. Block parties, homeowners association meetings, and informal street conversations now unfold with greater restraint. Men who once engaged freely in banter with neighbors or helped with minor repairs now pause before offering assistance, activating recording if the interaction extends beyond a quick hello. A borrowed tool returned late, a fence line dispute over property markers, or a complaint about noise during a backyard gathering all become scenarios where footage preserves the exact terms agreed upon or the tone used. The practice discourages passive aggressive escalation through anonymous notes or group text pile-ons because evidence can clarify who said what and when. Community bulletin boards and local online forums see fewer inflammatory threads as residents recognize that screenshots alone lose potency against full context video. The result is a quieter but more functional neighborhood life where conflicts resolve through direct reference to records rather than rumor mills. Religious and spiritual communities confront the trend with particular complexity. Houses of worship that host mixed gender small groups, counseling sessions, or volunteer coordination increasingly see participants arrive with discrete recording capability. A man attending a Bible study, men's fellowship, or marriage retreat might document discussions involving personal disclosures or advice given, protecting against later mischaracterizations if tensions arise within the congregation. Pastors and lay leaders notice the shift and respond variably. Some welcome the transparency as a safeguard against false accusations that have damaged ministries in the past, while others worry it undermines the vulnerability required for genuine spiritual growth. Certain congregations draft guidelines encouraging mutual consent for recording during sensitive pastoral care, framing it as an extension of existing confidentiality practices rather than a breach of trust. The adaptation preserves community function while acknowledging that even sacred spaces now operate under the broader societal expectation of verifiable interaction. Educational extracurriculars and after school programs reflect similar adjustments. Male tutors, mentors, and club advisors working with mixed gender youth groups equip themselves with body cams during sessions, especially in one on one or small group settings. A high school robotics coach helping a female student debug code, or a music teacher demonstrating technique on an instrument now has visual proof that guidance remained professional and task focused. Parents who once expressed concern about male involvement in such roles grow more comfortable when they learn documentation occurs routinely as a standard precaution. Program coordinators update permission forms to include notes about potential recording for safety and accountability, turning what could have been a flashpoint into a normalized protocol. The presence of footage reduces hesitation among qualified male volunteers, helping sustain programs that depend on diverse adult participation. The gig economy and freelance marketplaces accelerate adoption because independent contractors lack institutional shields. Drivers, couriers, task rabbit helpers, pet sitters, and handymen operating through apps carry recording devices as default equipment. A delivery driver accused of mishandling a package or a cleaner reported for theft can produce time-stamped video showing careful handling or the exact state of a home left behind. Clients who understand the practice often appreciate the mutual protection it offers against their own potential disputes over service quality. Platform policies evolve slowly but steadily. Some apps now allow drivers to upload relevant clips directly into resolution centers, speeding up dispute processing and reducing payout denials based on uncorroborated claims. The freelance landscape becomes more predictable for men who rely on ratings and reviews as objective evidence tempers the impact of outlier negative feedback. Creative professions and collaborative projects integrate recording in ways that balance artistic flow with practical protection. Independent filmmakers, podcasters, and content creators working with mixed gender teams document planning sessions, on-set interactions, and post-production feedback to protect against later disputes over credit, creative control, or workplace atmosphere. A male director collaborating with a female writer or cinematographer can reference footage to clarify who proposed which idea or how boundaries were negotiated during intense creative debates. The practice proves especially valuable in indie projects where formal contracts remain minimal and trust must carry significant weight. Collaborators adapt by treating recorded meetings as official documentation, often summarizing key decisions verbally for the record at session close. The method preserves creative energy while providing a safety net against revisionist narratives that could derail partnerships. Scientific and research environments adopt the technology selectively but decisively in fieldwork and collaborative labs. Male researchers conducting interviews, participant observations, or joint experiments with female colleagues use body cams or fixed recorders to document protocols, consent processes, and data collection steps. The footage safeguards against allegations of misconduct in settings where power differentials exist between principal investigators and assistants or subjects. Institutional review boards begin requiring documentation plans for certain human subjects research, viewing personal recording as an acceptable supplement to signed forms and lab notebooks. The added layer of verification strengthens reproducibility claims and protects reputations in fields where replication crises already demand rigorous transparency. Political organizing and activism circles encounter the recording wave with heightened tension. Grassroots canvassers, rally participants, and door to door campaign workers equip themselves with discrete cameras when engaging in mixed gender teams or approaching strangers. A male volunteer accused of aggressive tactics or inappropriate comments during voter outreach can counter with footage showing calm, scripted interactions. The practice deters bad faith infiltrators who might provoke incidents for viral outrage while protecting genuine participants from smear campaigns. Organizers in polarized movements now brief teams on recording etiquette, emphasizing de escalation and clear identification of devices to avoid perceptions of secrecy. The dynamic forces activists on all sides to maintain discipline, knowing that any overreach risks immediate visual rebuttal. The cumulative impact on language itself proves profound. Everyday speech patterns shift toward precision and away from hyperbole. Jokes that rely on exaggeration or ambiguity lose favor because they invite misinterpretation when replayed without surrounding context. Compliments, once casual and effusive, become more specific and tied to observable actions to reduce room for reframing. Disagreements express themselves through questions rather than declarations, as participants anticipate that assertions will face scrutiny against recorded evidence. The change produces a more formal public discourse where clarity trumps flair and brevity serves as a virtue when every word can resurface. Economic incentives continue to reinforce the trend at macro levels. Men who maintain long term single status accumulate wealth at accelerated rates through uninterrupted compounding, lower lifestyle inflation, and avoidance of high risk financial entanglements. Studies tracking household formation show widening gaps in net worth between never married men and their female counterparts in similar age cohorts, driven partly by differing investment behaviors and expense patterns. The disparity becomes visible in real time through social comparison, motivating some women to pursue parallel strategies of extreme self reliance, while others double down on public appeals for restored relational norms. The feedback loop strengthens male withdrawal as a rational response to perceived risk, further entrenching the Cold Era dynamics. Technological refinement keeps lowering barriers to on entry. Next generation wearables promise seamless integration of recording with health monitoring, navigation, and productivity tools, making the feature feel incidental rather than deliberate. Battery life extends to multi day capture, storage moves to encrypted cloud with local caching, and AI assisted tagging automatically flags segments with elevated volume, rapid speech, or proximity alerts. These improvements reduce the conscious effort required, transforming recording from an active choice into passive background operation for many users. The philosophical shift settles into a new equilibrium. Society accepts that perfect trust belongs to an earlier era, replaced by functional trust earned through consistent, verifiable conduct. The recording infrastructure enforces that standard without requiring constant human oversight. Interactions grow leaner and more purposeful, shedding layers of pretense that once masked imbalances. The result is not utopia, but a more honest baseline, where consequences align more closely with actions and truth emerges as the default rather than the exception. The recording habit eventually seeps into the most private corners of life that still involve any cross gender contact, including medical appointments, legal consultations, financial planning sessions, therapy, and even religious confession in denominations that permit lay participation. Men scheduling routine physicals, dental cleanings, dermatology visits, or physical therapy now routinely ask upfront whether the provider objects to personal recording for personal records. When the answer is no, which is the majority answer in most private practices, they simply begin capture the moment the door closes. The presence of the device usually produces two very immediate effects. First, the professional becomes noticeably more structured, more precise in language, more careful about physical touch explanations, more thorough in documenting verbal consent for every step. Second, the patient leaves the appointment with an unusually clear memory of what was actually said and decided because the entire exchange is preserved rather than left to the normal degradation of recollection. The same pattern repeats in lawyer client meetings, especially family law, estate planning, and employment law consultations. A man discussing a potential divorce filing, child custody arrangement, prenuptial modification, or workplace discrimination claim now frequently records the entire consultation. Many attorneys have already accepted this reality and simply start the session by noting for the record that the meeting is being recorded by the client. The knowledge that every piece of advice, every cost estimate, every strategic option discussed is captured verbatim removes a tremendous amount of later he said, she said friction that used to plague these relationships. Financial advisors and certified public accountants see exactly the same evolution. When a man sits down to discuss asset allocation, retirement drawdown strategy, tax loss harvesting, trust funding, or business succession planning, the conversation now frequently occurs with an active recorder on the table. The device forces both parties to speak in complete sentences, to avoid verbal shorthand, to restate numbers clearly, and to document every assumption that is being made about future market behavior, life expectancy, health costs, or liquidity needs. Clients who have been burned in the past by vague verbal promises about aggressive but safe strategies now leave meetings holding literal proof of what risk level they were actually told they were accepting. Even the world of personal training, nutrition coaching, life coaching, and executive coaching has largely normalized recording. High hourly rate coaches who once sold almost exclusively on charisma and relationship building now have to operate in an environment where every motivational speech, every diet tweak suggestion, every homework assignment, every boundary discussion is potentially preserved forever. The highest earning coaches in this new landscape are usually the ones who adapted fastest. They became radically more systematic. They provide far more written follow up. They record sessions themselves with client permission, and they treat every word they say as though it will be played back in a deposition at some point. Another very visible front is the explosion of men recording every single customer service call they make and openly telling the agent that the call is being recorded on their end. When a man calls his bank, his credit card company, his internet provider, his health insurance company, his car insurance adjuster, his airline, his landlord's management office, or his cell phone carrier, he very frequently opens with, "I'm recording this call for quality and record keeping purposes." That single sentence changes the entire tone of the interaction. The agent instantly becomes more polite, more accurate, more willing to escalate, more generous with exceptions, more careful about promises. Agents know that a recording from the customer's side can be used in small claims court, in regulatory complaints, in public shaming on social media, or simply sent straight to the supervisor the next time the company tries to claim that was never said. Entire categories of consumer disputes that used to be heavily weighted against the customer have started swinging back toward the customer simply because of this 5-second sentence. Refund denials, fee reversals, late fee waivers, incorrect billing corrections, service date reschedules, damage claim approvals. All of these categories show statistically significant increases in customer success rates once recording is announced. The companies know it too. Many of them have quietly instructed frontline agents to treat every announced recording as a high alert call and to escalate almost automatically rather than risk a bad clip going viral. We are therefore watching a very strange inversion of power happen in real time. The individual consumer, armed only with a $40 voice recorder or a free call recording app, has managed to claw back a meaningful amount of leverage against trillion-dollar corporations. This same logic is now migrating into roommate situations, shared house agreements, lease negotiations with private landlords, and even informal loans between friends. When two men share an apartment, they frequently record the initial move-in condition walkthrough together. When a man rents a room in a house owned by a woman, he often records the move-in inspection and the move-out inspection. When a man loans money to a friend, male or female, he is increasingly likely to record the conversation in which the repayment terms are discussed and agreed upon. In all of these situations, the recording is not being made because the other person is distrusted from the beginning. It is being made because experience, either personal or heard through the network, has taught that memory is plastic, that good intentions can fade, and that money plus time plus human nature equals sign very high probability of later disagreement about what was actually promised. The recording removes the disagreement space. It does not remove conflict. It simply removes the ability to have productive, long lasting, destructive conflict based on contradictory recollections. That is a very large difference. Another domain that is changing fast is the world of used item transactions. Facebook Marketplace, OfferUp, Craigslist, local car sales, motorcycle sales, electronic sales, furniture flipping, sneaker reselling, watch trading, etc. Men who buy and sell in these spaces now very commonly record the entire in person negotiation, the condition explanation, the test drive with audio. The moment money changes hands, the buyer seller saying as is, no warranty expressed or implied. The recording is usually not hidden. It is done openly, phone propped up on the dashboard or the kitchen counter, and the other party is told exactly what is happening. Most people shrug and accept it because they understand the logic. If you're clean, you have nothing to worry about. The people who become visibly uncomfortable and try to shut the recording down are almost always the ones who are planning to misrepresent something. Thus, the existence of the practice itself becomes a very quick credibility filter. The broader cultural consequence is enormous. Over and over again, in thousands of micro interactions every day, people are being forced to reveal very early whether they are comfortable operating in a world of evidence or whether they still want to operate in a world of narrative advantage. Most people eventually adapt and become comfortable with evidence. The ones who never adapt tend to lose access to a growing number of transactions, opportunities, and relationships. That selection pressure is very real and it is compounding year after year. We are watching a slow, massive, society wide sorting process. People who are comfortable being recorded, people who are willing to stand behind their words and actions when there is an objective record, are gaining access to more and more spaces. People who become agitated, defensive, or aggressive the moment recording is mentioned are gradually being excluded from more and more spaces. It is not happening with a big dramatic announcement. It is happening one declined transaction, one avoided conversation, one refused mentorship, one canceled date, one unfriended contact, one empty chair at the group project, one unreturned phone call at a time. The sorting is quiet, relentless, and extremely effective. And once a person has been sorted into the not comfortable with evidence category, it becomes progressively harder to get back into the other category, because trust is very hard to rebuild after it has been withdrawn. That is the deeper mechanism that makes this change feel irreversible to so many people who are watching it unfold. You cannot uninvent cheap, high quality, all day, easy to use recording. You cannot unteach millions of men that recording works, that it protects careers, protects money, protects reputations, protects time, protects peace of mind. You cannot undemonstrate that the people who object the loudest to being recorded are very often the people who benefit the most from contradictory narratives. And once those three realizations are widespread, there is no going back to the older social contract. The older contract was believe me because I am saying it and because I belong to a group that should be believed by default. The new contract is prove it, or at the very least, don't contradict the recording. That is a civilizational pivot. And civilizational pivots do not reverse easily, they usually only accelerate. The shift toward evidence based interactions has now begun reshaping how people evaluate long term compatibility before any serious emotional investment even starts. In the early stages of potential romantic interest, whether through apps, mutual friends, or chance meetings, men increasingly conduct quiet, low key background checks that go far beyond a casual social media scroll. They look for patterns in public posts, old comment threads, stories archived or not, group affiliations, protest photos, workplace tags, and especially any visible history of interpersonal conflict that made it online. The goal is not stalking, it is pattern recognition. A woman who has a long trail of screenshots from ex partners, viral call out posts, deleted but screenshot cached accusations, or repeated public meltdowns over relatively minor disagreements raises an immediate red flag. Not because those events prove she is inherently dangerous, but because they demonstrate a comfort level with weaponizing narrative that is incompatible with a recording saturated world where narrative can be instantly fact checked. Men who have internalized the new reality tend to apply a simple heuristic. If her public digital footprint shows a preference for drama amplification over private resolution, the probability that she will accept evidence based accountability drops sharply. They therefore de risk by never advancing past surface level acquaintance. The woman in question may never know why the promising conversation simply evaporated after a few messages or one coffee. She attributes it to men these days or fear of commitment. But the actual calculation was colder and more mechanical. High demonstrated preference for unverifiable claims equals high future liability in a world that no longer defaults to believing the first story told. This filtering mechanism operates symmetrically in reverse for some women who have also adapted. High value women who understand the recording dynamic now screen men for the opposite trait. Does he show any sign of being comfortable lying under pressure, gaslighting when confronted with evidence, or flipping out when asked to clarify a contradictory statement? A man who bristles at the mere mention of, let's record this so we're both clear, during an early logistics conversation about meeting times or boundaries is frequently nexted immediately. The reasoning is symmetric. If he cannot tolerate transparency in small matters, he will almost certainly weaponize ambiguity in large ones. The net result is a dramatically narrower funnel for both sides. The pool of people willing to move from casual acquaintance to actual dating shrinks because each party now applies stricter evidentiary filters before emotional capital is committed. First dates, when they happen, are shorter, more structured, more public, and more frequently recorded with mutual awareness. Many never progress beyond that first meeting because one side or the other spots a discrepancy between words and observable behavior that the recording makes impossible to ignore later. Another layer that is hardening fast is the professional networking space. Conferences, industry mixers, alumni events, trade shows, and even informal happy hours now carry a noticeably different energy. Men who used to work the room freely now limit interactions to quick handshakes, business card exchanges, and surface level small talk unless the conversation is explicitly professional and likely to be followed by email trails. The reason is straightforward. The same man who records workplace interactions also records networking conversations because those conversations frequently lead to job referrals, partnerships, board seats, or speaking opportunities. A casual remark made at 11 p. over drinks, yeah, we're definitely looking to bring someone in next quarter, can later be reframed as a firm verbal offer if the follow up never materializes. The recording neutralizes that reframing risk. Women in these same spaces have started noticing the withdrawal and responding in two main ways. Some double down on building all female networks, mastermind groups, and women only accelerators, explicitly marketing them as safer spaces free from the surveillance culture men are bringing. Others adapt by becoming radically more transactional themselves. They lead with clear value propositions, document every mutual commitment in follow up emails, and proactively suggest happy to hop on a quick recorded call to confirm next steps when momentum builds. The women who take the second path tend to maintain or even increase their deal flow because they signal early that they operate comfortably in an evidence based environment. Corporate succession planning and mentorship programs are also being forced to evolve. High potential male employees who once avoided formal mentorship of female juniors now agree, but only under documented conditions. Regular check ins are recorded with mutual consent. Goals and deliverables are tracked in shared project management tools with timestamp comments, and progress reviews happen in group settings or with written summaries CC'd to HR. The arrangement is not hostile, it is simply engineered to remove ambiguity. Companies that refuse to accommodate these safeguards lose top male talent to organizations that do, or to men who simply opt out of mentorship entirely and focus on individual performance metrics instead. The phenomenon has also migrated into the fitness and body modification world. Men training for physique competitions, powerlifting meets, or even casual gym transformations now record every coaching session with online coaches or in person trainers. The footage serves multiple purposes. It documents form cues to prevent injury claims, captures exact programming instructions so progress can be audited later, and protects against coaches who later claim the client didn't follow the plan when results stall. Trainers who object to being recorded lose clients quickly because the market now rewards those who say, record away, I stand by every rep I call. The same logic applies to plastic surgeons, dermatologists performing cosmetic procedures, and med spa technicians. Patients, increasingly male in these categories, record consent discussions, pre op markings, and post op instructions. Surgeons, who once relied on charisma and before and after photos, now have to operate knowing their verbal explanations are preserved forever. Real estate transactions have become one of the clearest battlegrounds for the new norm. Buyers and sellers, especially in competitive urban markets, now frequently record every showing, every negotiation call, every inspection walkthrough, and every closing table conversation. The recordings capture agent disclosures or lack thereof, condition representations, repair request discussions, and financing contingency explanations. In hot markets where bidding wars lead to waived inspections or as is purchases, buyers protect themselves by documenting the exact verbal assurances given about roof age, foundation stability, or neighborhood trends. Agents who once closed deals on charm and vague promises now speak far more carefully, knowing a casual, this place is solid, can become Exhibit A in a later misrepresentation lawsuit. The practice has driven up the cost of errors so sharply that many veteran agents now carry their own recorders and insist on mutual recording during key moments. Even the world of pet adoption, fostering, and breeding is changing. Men adopting dogs or cats from shelters or private rehomes now record the handoff conversation, including any disclosed behavioral issues, medical history, or temperament notes. When a rescue organization later claims the adopter didn't follow the contract or caused the animal distress, the recording frequently resolves the dispute in minutes rather than months of back and forth emails. Breeders selling high value puppies or kittens record health guarantees, lineage explanations, and temperament testing results. Buyers who once relied on trust now leave with both a contract and a time-stamped video of the breeder swearing to every representation made. The legal community itself has had to confront the flood of personal recordings entering evidence. Family court judges now routinely watch clips of co-parenting exchanges, child drop-offs, and argument escalations that were once described only through dueling affidavits. Employment arbitrators sift through body cam footage from break room conversations, parking lot discussions, and performance reviews. Civil litigators on both plaintiff and defense sides have added personal recording authentication to their standard discovery checklists. The sheer volume of high definition, time-stamped, geolocated material has forced courts to develop faster triage processes. Preliminary hearings now often include quick video reviews to determine whether a claim has prima facie merit before full discovery begins. The effect is to weed out weaker cases earlier, reducing court backlogs, but also making it harder for genuinely ambiguous situations to reach trial when one side holds decisive footage. Insurance companies have quietly become major downstream beneficiaries. Claims adjusters now request claimant submitted personal recordings as standard practice in slip and fall, auto accident, property damage, and workplace injury disputes. A store patron claiming a wet floor fall can be contradicted by the claimant's own body cam clip showing them sprinting through the aisle. A driver insisting the other party ran a red light can have their story checked against the dash cam or smart glasses footage submitted by the defendant. Fraud detection units use the incoming flood of civilian footage to train better AI models for spotting exaggerated injury claims or staged accidents. Premiums in high litigation categories have started to stabilize or even decline slightly in jurisdictions where recording adoption is highest because overall claim severity drops when exaggeration becomes riskier. The cultural aftershock is visible in entertainment consumption patterns. Streaming data analysts note sharp drops in viewership for shows built around he said, she said drama, false accusation plot lines, and courtroom battles that hinge on credibility contests. Audiences who live in recording saturated realities find those tropes less believable and therefore less entertaining. Content creators who want to retain male viewers have pivoted toward stories emphasizing evidence, logic, personal responsibility, and consequences for deception. True crime podcasts that once thrived on ambiguous witness testimony now lose listeners unless they incorporate actual footage analysis. The public appetite has tilted toward narratives where truth is mechanically verifiable rather than rhetorically persuasive. The recording culture has now matured into something far more structural than a personal defense mechanism. It has become one of the primary filters through which modern institutions filter risk, allocate trust, and assign opportunity. Large employers in knowledge heavy sectors, technology, finance, consulting, law, medicine have quietly shifted internal promotion criteria to favor candidates who demonstrate a long track record of low conflict, high documentation interactions. When reviewing promotion packets or succession slates, senior leaders increasingly look not just at output metrics, but at the absence of HR complaints, the presence of clean investigatory files, and, when available, the pattern of how a candidate handles ambiguous situations. Men who have consistently recorded key interactions tend to emerge with cleaner records because disputes resolve faster and more favorably when evidence exists from the beginning. The unspoken bias creeps in. The man who never leaves ambiguity on the table is perceived as lower risk leadership material than the man whose file contains even one or two unsubstantiated but still present notations from years earlier. This creates a compounding career advantage that is difficult to measure directly but easy to observe in aggregate. Promotion rates, bonus pools, equity grants, and C suite pipelines in many Fortune 500 companies now skew noticeably towards men who adopted recording early and consistently. The effect is not dramatic in any single year, it compounds over a decade. A 35-year-old director who has never had a formal complaint sustained against him because every questionable interaction was documented ends up with a personnel file that looks materially stronger than a peer whose file contains two resolved but still present, he said, she said, entries from 2018 and 2022. Over time, the difference in trajectory becomes visible. One man reaches vice president by 42, while the other plateaus at senior manager. Boards and executive recruiters notice the pattern and begin asking subtle questions during reference checks. How does he handle difficult conversations? The answer, he always documents everything clearly, now lands as a strength rather than a quirk. Parallel to this professional sorting, a similar sorting is occurring in the informal economy of favors, introductions, and side opportunities. The men who are known to record are the ones other men increasingly prefer to do business with, partner with, invest with, or refer clients to. A real estate investor looking for a reliable contractor prefers the one who says, I record all walkthroughs and change order discussions for both our protection, over the one who shrugs and says, we can just shake on it. A startup founder raising angel money prefers the co founder candidate who has a folder of recorded pitch meetings and due diligence calls over the one whose communication style leaves everything verbal and deniable. The preference is rational. In high stakes environments where hundreds of thousands or millions change hands, ambiguity is poison. Recording removes most of the poison. Women who have adapted to the new reality and who themselves record interactions are gaining parallel advantages in these same circles. The female founder who records every investor meeting, every term sheet negotiation, every advisor call is perceived as exceptionally professional and low drama. The female executive who documents performance reviews, project handoffs, and cross team feedback loops ends up with promotion packets that are airtight. The market rewards both genders when they operate comfortably in evidence based mode. The penalty falls disproportionately on those, male or female, who still insist that trust should be extended without verification, or who become visibly uncomfortable when transparency is proposed. This dual sided reward structure is quietly reshaping who rises and who stagnates across entire industries. The people who thrive in the recording era are those who speak deliberately, commit clearly, follow through visibly, and welcome scrutiny because their behavior holds up under it. The people who struggle are those whose default mode is emotional reactivity, selective memory, exaggeration for effect, or reliance on social proof over factual proof. The sorting is not ideological, it is behavioral. And because behavior is habit, the sorting becomes generational. Young men entering the workforce today do not need to be convinced of the value of recording. It is already ambient knowledge by the time they graduate high school. Short form video explainers, forum threads, podcast breakdowns, private group chats, and older siblings have normalized the practice so thoroughly that a 22-year-old walking into his first corporate internship often arrives with a body camera already in his backpack. Not because he expects trouble on day one, but because he has been taught that trouble arrives without warning and leaves permanent marks unless countered with evidence. Campus career centers now include personal documentation strategies in professional development workshops, framing it as modern risk management rather than paranoia. The generation coming behind them will treat recording the way previous generations treated wearing a seatbelt or backing up a hard drive, non negotiable basic hygiene. The macro demographic consequences are only now becoming visible in national statistics. Marriage rates continue their multi decade decline, but the slope has steepened noticeably among men under 35 in high recording adoption cohorts. Cohabitation without marriage is also flattening, as even that arrangement carries perceived legal and financial risk without offsetting benefits. Birth rates in developed economies with strong one party consent laws are dropping faster than in jurisdictions with stricter two party requirements, suggesting a link between evidentiary culture and reproductive caution. Governments respond with increasingly desperate incentives, date subsidies, baby bonuses, housing grants for young couples. But participation remains low because the foundational trust required to form a family has been eroded by years of hearing better safe than sorry applied to every cross gender interaction. Women in their late 20s and early 30s are beginning to voice a different kind of public frustration. Viral threads no longer focus solely on where are the good men. They increasingly ask, why does every promising guy disappear after one or two dates when I suggest we keep things verbal and off record? The answers in the replies range from denial to grim acknowledgement that men have learned ambiguity gets them burned. Some women experiment with proactive recording themselves, announcing at the start of a date, I record for my safety too, cool, and report higher quality conversations and faster filtering of incompatible matches. Others reject the practice entirely and find their dating pool shrinking to men who either do not care about risk or who have not yet internalized the new norms. The philosophical tension at the heart of all this deserves a final examination. For half a century, the dominant cultural message was that feelings are facts, that lived experience trumps objective reconstruction, that believing self identified victims by default was a moral imperative. That framework produced real gains in exposing genuine abuse, but also created systemic vulnerabilities when applied without reciprocal scrutiny. The recording wave is the direct counterforce, a technological reassertion that objective reality still exists and can be captured mechanically when human memory and motive prove unreliable. It does not deny that feelings matter. It insists that feelings do not override verifiable sequence of events when consequences are at stake. The pendulum has swung hard toward empiricism in the interpersonal domain, and the discomfort many feel is the friction of that swing. Critics argue this creates a colder, more mechanical society where spontaneity dies and everyone walks on eggshells. They are not entirely wrong. Spontaneity has indeed declined in mixed gender settings. Humor has become more restrained, flirtation more explicit and consensual, banter more cautious. Yet proponents counter that what has died is not warmth itself, but the illusion of warmth built on one sided deference. Genuine connection, they say, can only flourish when both parties know the ground rules are the same and the facts are accessible to both. The relationships that survive and thrive in this environment tend to be built on unusually high mutual clarity from the outset, less fireworks, more steady burn. In the end, the recording era is neither punishment nor salvation, it is consequence. When one side of a social equation pushes for unchecked narrative authority long enough, the other side eventually invents or adopts tools that restore balance through transparency. The tools arrive cheaply, discreetly, and irreversibly. Once millions carry them habitually, the baseline expectation moves permanently toward documentation. Attempts to legislate the practice away run into the same wall every time. Self defense is a fundamental interest. One party consent is settled law in many places, and equal protection arguments defeat gender specific bans. The technology wins because it is neutral, portable, and undeniable. Society therefore transitions into an age where trust is earned through consistency rather than demanded through status or group membership. Interactions become leaner, more purposeful, less theatrical. Disputes shrink because the cost of fabrication rises sharply. Careers advance or stall on objective track records rather than subjective impressions. Families form or fail to form on the strength of demonstrated reliability rather than romantic projection. The world grows colder in tone, but clearer in outline, more guarded in approach, but more honest in outcome. The men who walked away, they did not do so out of spite. They did so because the old contract became unworkable. Too much downside, too little upside, too much presumption of guilt, too little presumption of good faith. They found peace in solitude, competence in self reliance, wealth in undivided focus. Now the recording lens forces the rest of society to confront the same arithmetic. Those who adapt flourish in the new clarity. Those who resist find themselves increasingly on the outside looking in, wondering why the room emptied. This is not the end of connection. It is the end of connection without consequence. And in that shift lies the possibility of something more durable. Relationships, workplaces, friendships, and institutions built on mutual evidence rather than unilateral faith. The path is narrower, the air is thinner, but the foundation is solid. Winter has arrived, as some predicted. Yet winter also brings clarity, forces preparation, and rewards those who face reality without flinching. If you have stayed with the series all the way to the final stretch, enormous respect to the 2 hour gang that powered through every word of the full breakdown. If these angry guy deep dives have given you the unfiltered map of where things are really heading, show some support by grabbing me a Red Bull through the link in the description. Drop into the comments and tell me, after seeing the complete picture, what part of this transformation do you think will prove most permanent? Do you believe society ultimately ends up fairer or just more distant because of it? And how are you navigating these changes in your own life right now? Like the video, if the whole arc hit hard, do not forget to subscribe so you catch whatever comes next. And if this series clarified anything for you, share it wide so others can see the full scope too. Just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.